At Christmas dinner, my grandfather raised his glass and smiled from the other end of the table. Then he said, "Do you like the house I bought for you?" All the silverware froze in midair. I blinked, confused. What house? For a second, no one breathed. Then my mother's hand slipped from her wine glass, and her face went pale. My grandfather's smile vanished. He pushed his chair back, the sound cutting through the silence. "Show me the deed. Now." That was the moment everything broke. But what none of them knew, what not even my grandfather knew yet, was that this dinner had been planned long before they ever sat down at the table. 2 weeks before that dinner, I wasn't thinking about deeds or houses. I was thinking about rent, overdue bills, and whether instant noodles could count as dinner 3 nights in a row. My apartment in Mexico City was small, the kind where the water heater made more noise than your own thoughts. But it was mine, or at least the only thing I paid for with my own money. Every December, my parents loved to remind me that independence builds character. They usually say this right after posting photos of their ski trips to Colorado in their new cars. My mother's texts always started sweet and ended with a punch. "You should learn to manage money like an adult." I never replied. Silence was the only way to keep the peace in our family. The only person who never made me feel small was my grandfather, Lincoln. He was everything my parents pretended to be: disciplined, fair, and quietly powerful. When I was 22, he told me, "Someday I'll make sure you have a place that's your own." At the time, I thought he was talking about giving me advice, not a real house. He loved plans, not surprises. That's why, when he called me a week before Christmas, I sensed something strange in his voice. He said, "I have a special gift for you this year." I laughed it off. "Grandpa, you don't have to buy me anything." He chuckled softly. "Oh, that's already been taken care of." I didn't think about it again until later that night, as I was scrolling through my phone and saw my parents' posts from their dinner in Guadalupe Valley. Red wine, perfect smiles, all with the caption, "Family is everything." It felt like a joke I wasn't in on. I told my friend Claire about the call. We were at our usual coffee shop, both hunched over laptops, pretending to work. She gave me a sideways smile. "A special gift, huh? Maybe he's finally realized you deserve better than their leftovers." I smiled, but it didn't reach my eyes. Or maybe it's another lecture wrapped with a bow. Outside, the Christmas lights flickered against the drizzle. Inside, my coffee had gone cold. I didn't know it yet, but the gift my grandfather was talking about wasn't waiting under a tree. It was waiting to expose everything I thought I knew about my family. A few days later, I was searching for a client's invoice on my laptop when an unfamiliar email popped up. The subject line read, "Congratulations on the successful sale of the Pacifico private property." At first, I thought it was spam. Then I saw the address, Pacifico Private. My heart gave a short, painful thump. It was the same street my grandfather had mentioned years ago, the place he said would suit my spirit. I looked at the message again, feeling my throat tighten. Sold. But sold to whom? I called my mother, trying to keep my voice light. "Hey, random question. Did Grandpa ever buy a house on Pacifico Private?" There was a pause that was a little too long. Then her tone became light. Too light. "Oh, that? No, the market crashed that year, remember? It never went through." "It's just that I got a strange email," I said slowly. Her breath hitched. "Stella, you shouldn't open things that aren't yours. You always blow things out of proportion." And just like that, she hung up. I sat there, the phone buzzing in my hand, trying to understand what had just happened. For the first time, her calmness sounded like fear. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every creak in my apartment felt like a whisper saying, "They lied." I kept digging, tracing the email back to a real estate office in Valle de Bravo. The next morning, I called, pretending to be a buyer interested in recent sales. The agent confirmed that the house had been sold 3 years ago in the name of Wyatt Briones. My hands went numb. My mother and father had sold it and never told me. When my grandfather called later to confirm Christmas dinner, I almost told him everything, but something in me froze. I wasn't ready to be the one to break his heart. Instead, I said, "Of course I'll be there. I'll bring dessert." After hanging up, I stared out the window at the fine snowflakes falling. It was one of those rare cold nights in the city, the lights blurring through the glass. Claire texted, asking if I was okay. I typed, "I think my parents stole something that was meant for me." She replied, "Then make sure they're the ones who give it back." I didn't answer. I just closed my laptop and whispered to the empty room, "All right then, Christmas dinner it is." 3 days before Christmas, I drove across the city in an icy rain to my grandfather's office. His assistant, Violet, greeted me with her usual calm smile, though something flickered in her eyes. "I just wanted to drop off his gift early," I said, trying to sound casual. My fingers trembled around the small, wrapped box. She hesitated, then lowered her voice. "Mr. Lincoln thought you had already moved." For a moment, the words didn't make sense. Moved? Where? Violet glanced around, then opened a drawer and pulled out a manila folder. "He always talks about how proud he is that you finally have your own place. The one on Pacifico Private." I felt the world tilt. "Pacifico Private," I repeated. She nodded, now whispering. "He bought it 2 years ago. He said it was in your name, that your parents handled the paperwork." Her eyes softened. "He truly believes you've been living there." I swallowed hard. Can I see something?" She hesitated again, then silently handed me a photocopy of the original deed. My name, big and unmistakable. Stapled behind it was another sheet, a sales contract signed by Wyatt Briones, my father's signature. Outside, the cold hit me like a punishment. I sat in my car, clutching the papers until they crumpled. I wanted to scream, but the only sound was the ticking of my turn signal. I'd forgotten to turn it off. That night, I called Claire. "They sold it," I said, my voice flat. "They took what was mine and told him I had it." She was silent for a second, then spoke softly. "So, what are you going to do?" "I'm going to dinner," I said. The next morning, I met with Jackson, my grandfather's lifelong lawyer. I didn't tell him everything, just enough to make him frown. "You'll be there, right?" I asked. He studied me. "Do you want me to protect your grandfather or expose your parents?" "Both," I replied, in that order. When I left his office, the rain had turned into a thin layer of snow and sleet. Mexico City was strangely quiet, the streets white, everything looking clean and untouched, though I knew it wasn't. I drove back, folded the papers, and tucked them into my purse. My reflection in the window looked calmer than I felt. "They think they're the only ones with a plan," I whispered. "But I have one too." Christmas night arrived dressed in golden light and silent tension. The family gathered around a table far too long for the number of hearts that still cared. The crystal chandelier glittered, and the glasses reflected the flames from the marble fireplace. Laughter floated like stage smoke, pretty, fake, and rehearsed. I sat across from my parents, half listening to their stories about investments and vacations. Every word scratched at my nerves. My grandfather sat at the head of the table, the only person whose smile still seemed real. He'd always been the anchor of this family, steady and unmovable. I wondered what would happen when he realized everything he built was resting on lies. He raised his glass. "To family," he said warmly. My mother's lipstick shone as she smiled back at him. "Always," she answered. I met her eyes for a second. There was something behind her expression, something that looked far too calculated. I had to bite my tongue to keep from asking her why. Dinner continued with polite conversation, the kind where everyone talks and no one listens. My grandfather asked about my work, my clients, if business was stable. "It's going well," I said, trying to keep my voice even. "It's not as profitable as selling someone else's property, though." My mother's fork clinked against her plate. "I'm sorry, what did you say?" "Nothing," I muttered, but the heat was already rising in my chest. My grandfather let out a soft chuckle. trying to lighten the mood. "You always were sharp, Stella." Then, as if testing the waters, he leaned forward slightly. "By the way, do you like the house I bought for you?" For half a second, I thought I had misheard him. The laughter stopped. The hum of the chandelier became silence. I blinked. My lips parted, but my voice came out thin. "What house?" The question cut through the air. My mother's hand slipped from her glass, spilling red wine across the tablecloth like blood on snow. My father's jaw tensed. My grandfather's eyes darted from one to the other, his confusion deepening. "What house?" I repeated louder this time. My grandfather set down his glass, the stem tapping against the wood. His face changed, disbelief hardening into anger. "Show me the deed, now." My father spoke first, his voice shaky but defensive. "Dad, this isn't the time." "It's exactly the time," my grandfather interrupted, his voice quiet but sharp as glass. "I trusted you to manage that property for her." My mother's voice broke. "Lincoln, please, just—" "Delilah," he said, locking his eyes on hers, "do not insult me with another lie." Every sound in the room was amplified. The crackling fire, the ticking grandfather clock, my own pounding pulse. Violet appeared at a side door as if she had been waiting for a cue. She handed my grandfather a brown envelope. He didn't even open it before calling for Jackson. Jackson entered with his briefcase in hand. "Mr. Lincoln," he said evenly, "you asked me to review some transactions earlier this week. I think you'll want to see this." He opened the briefcase and spread documents across the table. I watched the color drain from my parents' faces. Jackson pointed to the first sheet. "This is the original purchase deed. Buyer, Stella Briones, signed and notarized." He moved to the next page. "And this, sold 3 months later, by Wyatt Briones. Transfer of funds confirmed here." My grandfather's hand trembled as he traced the signatures. "You sold her house," he whispered, "the one I bought for her future." My father swallowed. "We were just managing it. She wasn't ready." "Ready for what?" I snapped, letting the anger escape. "To have something of my own? To stop needing you?" My mother reached a hand toward me, desperate. "Honey, we did it for you. You were struggling. We thought—" I pulled my hand back. "No. You thought you could hide it." The air felt heavy with the heat that comes before a storm. My grandfather stood then, slowly, deliberately. The chair scraped against the floor with a sound that made everyone flinch. "From this day on," he said, "you will no longer speak for her." Nobody breathed. My mother began to cry, mascara running down her face. "Lincoln, we didn't want to hurt her." "But you did," he said quietly, "and you did it while smiling at my table." He reached into his vest pocket and pulled out a small velvet pouch. A silver key fell into his palm. He looked at me. "This was for you, Stella. It still is." He placed it on the table in front of me. At first, my hands wouldn't move. I couldn't. My throat was tight with something between relief and grief. My father stood up abruptly, knocking over his chair. "We're your family," he yelled. "You can't just cut us off over a misunderstanding." My grandfather's eyes hardened. "You're right. You are family, but you're not mine." Silence. The kind that's louder than shouting. My mother's voice broke again. "Stella, please, tell him we can fix this." I finally looked up, my gaze steady. "You can't fix something you already sold." Jackson gathered the papers and neatly put them back in his folder. "We will begin legal action tomorrow morning," he said. Violet stood behind my grandfather, her expression unreadable. Maybe it was pity, maybe satisfaction. My grandfather let out a long, heavy breath. "Merry Christmas," he said softly, "not to them, but to me." He placed a hand on my shoulder, the same hand that had taught me how to draw straight lines when I was a little girl. "You always had a good eye for balance," he murmured. My mother covered her face. My father turned away, muttering something I couldn't hear. It didn't matter. The sound of their excuses no longer carried any weight. I stood up, the cold key in my palm, and looked around the room. The lights on the tree twinkled. The air smelled of pine and betrayal. I had imagined revenge would feel fiery, but it felt quiet, like the end of a long, sad song. When I finally walked outside, the night air cut my cheeks. The snow had started again, soft flakes falling on the porch railing. Behind me, through the window, I could still see my grandfather standing tall, a silhouette against the warm light. Inside, my parents sat small and quiet, trapped in their own lies. I whispered to myself, almost like a prayer, they wanted me to earn my own life. I just did. And with that, I walked into the snow, free, cold, and awake for the first time in years. The next morning, the house was silent. No one mentioned the night before, but everyone felt its weight. My parents' car was gone before dawn, leaving only 2 tire tracks curving down the snowy driveway. They didn't say goodbye. My grandfather found me in the sunniest room, sitting with a cup of coffee that had already gone cold. His movements were slower than usual, the kind that come after a disappointment too deep to name. I gave them too much trust, he said quietly. I thought money could keep us honest. I looked at him. You believe the best in them. That's not a mistake. He shook his head. You reminded me what real honesty looks like. He reached into his jacket, pulled out an envelope, and slid it across the table. Inside were new papers with my name printed clearly at the top, the property deed, with no missing signatures this time. I had Jackson redraw everything last night, he said. It's official. The house is yours. Their part in this will be handled separately. My throat tightened. Grandpa, I don't even know if I want it anymore. He smiled, tired but warm. You don't have to move in right away. I just want you to know it's there waiting, just like I am, whenever you need me. Later that week, news rippled through the business circles of Mexico City. Wyatt and Delilah Briones had been quietly removed from several corporate boards. The family's once flawless reputation now had a visible crack, but no one on the outside knew the real story. I didn't feel triumphant or vengeful, just lighter. Over coffee with Claire, I told her I hadn't won anything. I had just stopped losing myself. She nodded, smiling. That's what winning really looks like. When I left the coffee shop, the snow had already melted, leaving a thin sheen on the sidewalks. For the first time in years, I walked without looking over my shoulder. A week later, I drove to Pacifico Private. The street was quiet, lined with evergreen trees, with bits of snow still clinging to the branches. The house was there. White walls, tall windows, a front porch waiting like an outstretched hand. I got out of the car, the air crisp and clean, and held the silver key up to the morning light. For the first time, I didn't feel like someone's daughter or someone's disappointment. I just felt like me. I put the key in the lock and whispered, home. Justice doesn't always shout. Sometimes it just stands up.